Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Notes series on White Plume Mountain from Tales from the Yawning Portal, where the classic adventure has been updated to 5th edition, and I've been DMing a group through it at my friendly local game store, and we've been having a great time. So this video series, if you're not familiar, I basically just kind of recap what happened on the previous session, kind of give thoughts and insight onto how I handle things as a DM. I try to be pretty transparent about it, warts and all, and then also go over like rules discussions and stuff like that. So if you're a first time viewer, glad to have you. Hope you enjoy it. If you're a returning viewer, thanks so much for returning. So really appreciate it. To jump right on into things, let's get into the viewer feedback, which we had a little bit for episode 13. And to get into that, I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback. And let's take a look at what we can see. Now there was some discussion came up last video from me talking about the Red Wizards of Thay, because one of my players uh, put that into their backstory that they were an escaped red slave of the Red Wizards of Thay, and they have this tattoo on their right or left arm or something anyway that's invisible until you cast Detect Magic, and then it glows and all this stuff. And I don't know a lot. I mean, I know the Red Wizards of Thay are a very powerful, kind of nasty uh, organization in the Forgotten Realms. That's all I know about them. I've never played any games that involved them. I know of them. I don't know a lot about them. Um, so it came up last session when the ring that supposedly had a wish that it didn't came up, and you'll just have to watch last video to get into all that. It's part of the Glass Globes room. I don't want to go over all that again, but we cover it pretty in depth last video. There was supposedly a wish, so the players like gave it to the one player whose character was a slave of the Red Wizard of Thay, so they could use the wish to get rid of this tattoo thing. So, which prompted questions when it turned out that the wish was basically not real, like, well, how could we get rid of it? So I started pressing the player on, okay, it's your backstory, so how does this tattoo work? And, what are, because some other players are like, can we dispel magic and this and that? So it prompted discussion in the game about this tattoo. So last video, I kind of reached out to people and said, what do we know about these tattoos? And my own uh, research kind of indicated that they're not really slave marks. They're more, a red wizard can apply a tattoo to somebody, and that tattoo then gives them like magical powers that reset each day, kind of thing. So it's kind of like you're a valuable slave or a valuable, ally or whatever, and the red wizard's giving you power. That's what I found researching. So, and the mark of the slave is usually you can't cut your hair. Uh, so, and I ruled on the spot last video. I said, well, I don't think dispel magic would get rid of this thing, because this is a really powerful wizard community, and I'm sure they've thought of that. Like an escaped slave could just go to some, hedge wizard basically and have detect magic cast on it or dispel magic. I don't think that would work. So anyway, all that being said, we had several comments on the Red Wizards of Thay, which don't necessarily apply to White Plume Mountain, I understand, but it seemed to generate some interesting feedback. And it also, uh, I want to cover this because it brings up the point that if a player is going to make something part of their character's backstory, I feel as the DM, it's up to that player to know the answers to that backstory. It's not my job as a DM to basically be a personal research assistant slash secretary and go, well, let me go find out how all this works. Because I said, well, what's the deal with this tattoo? It's like, well, I read something in a book like 10 years ago. And I'm like a novel. He's like, maybe the author took liberties or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, I still need to know how this works, since you're making a part of your backstory and it's come up in the game now and other players are asking questions. And he's like, man, this is just kind of a temporary character. And I'm like, so? I mean, it's your character. You made it part of your backstory. I think it's totally fair to expect players, if they introduce something into their backstory, to know about it. whether it's a temporary character or whatever. If you're going to introduce it as part of your character and it can come up in gameplay and I have to deal with it as a DM, you need to be able to answer those questions. Or you need to come to me and say, I don't know a lot about this, but can I make it part of my backstory because it sounds neat. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. You know, the player's like, oh, I'm just an escaped slave. Well, okay, I mean that could come up, and it did. Um, so anyway, again, I don't think that the DMs should have to go, okay, well, I'll spend several hours in between sessions to research all this for you so that we'll know how to handle it when it comes up next time. I just don't think that's the DM's job. Unless the DM just loves that kind of thing. It's like, no, I'll research it because I want to learn about it. Right? Okay. So anyway, um, so here we go with the viewer feedback. So Don Reum said, I gotta say bravo when you're trolling the player. It's also nice. It's always nice to see laugh out loud. So the trolling is talking about how one, the ring with the supposed wish is kind of a troll that Lawrence Schick, the designer of this module, kind of wrote into it. But two, I was like, when they were doing the wish, I was like, okay, be very specific, because in D&D, a wish can get you in trouble if you're not very specific. So, but even though I knew this wish was a dud and didn't really exist, I was like, now be very specific. I was just kind of messing with him. So that's what he's talking about. And then Don says, the mark left by the Red Wizards cannot be permanently dispelled by a dispel magic spell. By a dispel magic spell, all the dispel, I keep saying smell, dispel magic spell, all the dispel magic will do is make it ineffective for a short time when there's no bonuses. Where there is no bonuses, or will not glow if someone uses detect magic, if my memory serves me right. I do not remember where I heard this from, so take this with a grain of salt, but the limb has to be removed and then regenerated by a high-level cleric for the mark to be permanently gone. That's the way we always played it. Love the videos. Great work as always, Shane. Thanks, Don. So there we go. There's one take on it. You want to get rid of it? And even Don is saying, if I remember right. So it seems to be a lot of lore out there about the Red Wizards that may or may not be game accurate, right? I mean, it may be in novels, or it may have been in third edition. It was that way. So, and as a DM, I could always just say, well, here's how it's going to work. I don't want to do that because I don't know a lot about the Red Wizards of Thay. So, I'd like to know a little bit more before I make a ruling. Okay, so I'm going to cover the Red Wizard stuff and then come back to other comments that were made. Okay, so Scrage Grimclaw said, I didn't know Thavian slaves were magically tattooed. I was sure they were just not allowed to cut their hair. Okay, and then Scrage went to the extra step and went to Candlekeep Forum online and did some more research. Says slaves who have been in Thay for more than a month can always be told apart from the peasantry because slaves are not allowed to cut their hair, no matter where on the body it grows. This can, for the most part, be considered a brand of sorts, reflecting the person's status as a slave. Let's see. And then there's some other stuff in here that Scrage puts that you might want to go read for yourself. But he also says at the end, he says, but maybe this particular PC was a very valuable slave, which will make perfect sense if he was marked to make scrying spells more effective in case he runs away. If he could branch out to a really cool side quest. Exactly. See, I made it part of my backstory. Man, this stuff could come up. I think you should just make up rules for it, maybe even tie it with the rest of your campaign. I might. I don't know, but I really appreciate the feedback there, Scrage. Let's see what else we have. I think there was something else on the Red Wizards. Let's see. Yeah, and then I had Yertle Von Turtle said about the tattoo, what if its magic power allows his master to hear and see through his slave? It's kind of like Scrage was saying, you can scry. Thus, he's watching his slave and getting ready to claim the treasures from his slave. I like that a lot, actually. But here's the thing. This is one of my players, and very naughty. So we talked. I said, man, try not to watch this stuff until it's over because I talk about future plans and stuff like that. He's like, alrighty. So, but that's a very good comment. If you're watching this way down the road after this adventure is done, I did like that comment a lot. Let's see if anything else on the Red Wizards came up. I think that's it on the Red Wizards, but I really like that idea. a lot. And I've been thinking about having an end game where an organization unveils itself and says, now that you've got the weapons, we're going to take them from you. And I've been thinking about making is it the Zentarum, that kind of shady organization. But I kind of like the idea of Red Wizards now, so we'll see. Um, okay, so going back to the comments. Okay, um, now Scrage Grimclaw also commented on my house rule that if you're as a player are providing cover to a creature that's being attacked with ranged weapons or some other possible weird melee situation, and because of the lineup of everything, like you as a player are providing cover to the enemy that's being shot at, that gives half cover. That's what I rule, and it gives a +2 bonus to the AC of the enemy. Well, if the roll to hit misses within the margin of that +2, so like say they needed a 16 to hit and they rolled a 15, well that would be within that +2. Like originally the creature's armor class was a 14. Well, the cover bonus gave it a 16 because +2. Well, and somebody rolls a 15, that's within that margin. Then actually the ally that was providing cover gets hit. That's my house rule. And kind of researching around, it seems like some other people do that. And maybe that's how it was in another edition, and I just kept doing that. I don't know, but it just makes total sense to me. So that's how I do it as a DM. Now, Scrage said, I think according to the rules, allies do not grant cover because the game assumes that they are coordinating their attacks. Now, he did say I rule that if you roll a natural 1, you will hit an ally if he is in front of the enemy. So there's another house rule way of doing it. Now, Scrage, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I looked around, both online, and I did a quick look into the player's handbook, and I don't see anything that says allies do not grant cover because the game assumes they're coordinating their attacks. If that's there, which it very well could be, if you get a chance, give me that reference. I probably won't change my house rule, but it would be nice to know in general, and I could clarify that in the video series. I couldn't find it. What I did find was, several people online were asking the same question. Found out that other people did the same house rule I do, and then under cover in the player's handbook, let's see, let me find it here. On page 196, it just says walls, trees, creatures, and other obstacles can provide cover during combat, making a target more difficult to harm. So that's here we go. The obstacle might be, and this is talking about half cover. It says the obstacle might be a low wall, a large piece of furniture, a narrow tree trunk, or a creature, whether that creature is an enemy or a friend. So here it says a friend can provide half cover. So, but anyway, but if you have a reference that states otherwise, I'm happy to look at that and share it with everybody. Your house rule's fine too on the, rolling a 1. If you fumble while you're ranged at somebody and there's somebody in front of them, you hit them. That's fine too. And I said, thanks for the info on allies and cover. And then, regarding the allies, not being cover because they're coordinating, I said the grognard in me can't let that happy kumbaya madness fly. A little bit of grognard in me, folks. Can't let that fly. It's a little bit too happy for me, personally. But you can, of course, run your game however you want. So, Scrage, I always appreciate your comments, man. You got good insight on the game. Thank you. Okay, we already talked about Scrage's stuff on the Red Wizards, so I'm not going to go over that again. Let's see. All right. Rob Plummer said another great session, Shane. Thanks, keep them coming. I love that feedback, Ron. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so Cody Lloyd said, even if it was not intentional, since you have this rival party confirmed in the dungeon, I had an idea. And we're talking about the rival dungeoneering party is actually they're stymied by the Sphinx the last time the party saw them. Like they can't solve the riddle, so they're behind the force wall and trying to figure it out, just kind of for comedy relief. Little tension breaker. And he said, since your party do not smash all of the globes in the one room, he's talking about the glass globes room, Why not have the rival party finish it off, and when everyone is back in town, have the rival party brag about the spoils left behind? That's a good idea. I might do that. Thank you, Cody. That could be another fun little moment to do that if they don't go back on their own. Or they could go back on their own and see them all smashed, right? Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, so Ethan, who, if you'll remember, I think it's something, what is it, Ethan? Is it something anonymous? He runs a D&D stream, um, Anti-Heroes Anonymous, and he's also going through White Plume Mountain, and they're doing some other stuff. But anyway, Ethan said, "Hey Shane, great video as always. I haven't been able to comment on videos in a while because I've been busy planning the next arc of my game's main story. Um, his players voted unanimously to be done with White Plume and return to our homebrew game after claiming Black Razor. That's interesting. I'd be curious here, did they just not enjoy it? Was it a different tone than your homebrew? Did they think it was too hard? Just curious, why they didn't want to keep going. And that's a totally, I mean, the dungeon's in 3 sections. I mean, there's nothing that says you have to do the whole dungeon. And getting Black Razor in and of itself can be a really good reward. So now Ethan brought up a good point on wishes. And what he's basically saying is, he said, anyway, it's interesting wishes came up here because I just threw a wish into my story. One of my players is taking an extended break for personal reasons. So I orchestrated a situation where she could gamble with a genie for a wish, betting her very powerful magic battle axe. Then use that wish to create a reason for the character to leave. I just thought I'd mention it shows that there's more ways for a DM to use wishes besides trolling their players. Absolutely. And I think that was great storytelling and allowing the player and the DM to tell a cool story together. You don't have to troll your players with wishes by any means. They can be very powerful storytelling or game mechanic devices. There's just a tradition in D&D that you should ask your wish very carefully, because even and back in the day, I mean, even when they wrote the wish spell description, it said if it's not phrased right, it could really work against you. And the reason is because a wish can be very powerful. So I'm looking in 5th edition. Yeah, it says you might be able to achieve something beyond the scope of the above examples, and this is the wish spell description on page 288 and 289 in the player's handbook. It said the DM state your wish to the DM as precisely as possible. That's right in the spell description in 5th edition. It says the DM has great latitude in ruling what occurs in such an instance. The greater the wish, the greater the likelihood that something goes wrong. So the more you're trying to game the game with the wish, the more the game can, fight back, in other words, to balance things out. The spell might simply fail, the effect you desire might only be partially achieved, or you might suffer some unforeseen consequence as a result of how you worded the wish. For example, wishing that a villain were dead might propel you forward in time to a period when that villain is no longer alive, effectively removing you from the game. Similarly, wishing for a legendary magic item or artifact might instantly transport you to the presence of the item's current owner. So the stress of casting the spell to produce any effect other than duplicating another spell weakens you. So there's also you take necrotic damage. Looks like your strength drops. There's a 33% chance you're not able to cast wish ever again if you suffer this stress. So a wish is a very powerful thing, and it's maybe trolling is too strong of a word, but the designers, as far back as like Gary Gygax all the way up to 5th edition, are like, basically troll your players. And don't treat them wrong, but make them word it very precisely and look for ways to strong. If they say, hey, I wish I had an ice cream sundae, you have an ice cream sundae, no big deal. But if they I wish that I had the wealth of this realm, okay, and something's gonna happen there. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So anyway, Ethan, thanks for your comments on the wishes. I do agree that they're not there just to troll, but the more they try to unbalance the game with the wish, the more you should look for interesting ways to have unexpected things happen. So anyway, that is it for viewer feedback. Appreciate everybody watching, and I'm going to now remove my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we'll get into recapping this last session. Okay, so digging into what happened last week. All right, so first of all, one of my players came back. Yay! Big happy smiley face. I'm really glad he's back. And when you're watching this down the road, hopefully not as they occur, you know who you are, and I'm really glad to have you back. So, okay, now that player, different player that I was just talking about, that player. You know that one player that always pushes the boundaries? Always. Okay, so it's been pretty much since we've started, I've said if it's in the player's handbook or if it's in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, the SCAG, it go, you know, that's you can do that. You can do that play, you can do that race, you can do that uh, class, whatever. If it's in the player's handbook or if it's in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, go crazy. But this one player, not only do they always make a lot of new characters and are always wanting to swap out characters and this, that, and the other, which I'm starting to crack down on, but they're always pushing, well, can I do this and can I do this? You know, they've wanted to play some pretty crazy stuff, given the boundaries that have been established, which nobody else seems to have a problem with. So they came to me and say, can I be an Unearthed Arcana Ranger? A Beast Ranger of the Unearthed Arcana type, with a Velociraptor. I'm like, okay, so this is where I'm trying to, like, I want people to have fun, and I'm trying to give more leeway because I'm playing at a store, and I want to help the store too. And the store gives me a discount for it. That's not why I do it, but they give me a discount for running games there. That's not why I do it. I just did it because they needed DMs, and the discount came along with the. I was like, oh, cool, thanks. And it's because the store was kind of, you know, like, I'm not sure if we're going to stay open or not. And it's interesting to see new blood come in as management and stuff, and the store is coming back, and I feel good to be part of that. But anyway, so this guy, he's like, he's always pushing the boundaries on me. So I went and read this thing, and evidently a lot of people feel that the Unearthed Arcana or the Ranger is written in the 5th edition Player's Handbook is kind of weak. So they kind of redid the Ranger in Unearthed Arcana, and it seems to have had a good reception. And one of my other players, when all this came up, vouched so it's a very good, well balanced, it's fine, da da da. You know, he had played an Unearthed Arcana Ranger and vouched and all this. And I was like, okay. So I went and read it. I didn't see any problem with it. But yeah, so he's going to be a Beast Ranger out of Unearthed Arcana with a Velociraptor. And he was very clear to state that, you know, as we think of Velociraptors in the movies, those aren't really Velociraptors. There's something else. And I've heard that from other people. It's like, that's not actually a Velociraptor. A Velociraptor is like a little chicken-looking thing, evidently. And he said it fits the parameters of this, that, and the other. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But the point is, I'm about to, and I'm going to talk with a player and say, that's it. You know, I've been flexible and, you know, over and over with you. And I don't feel that you're being respectful to me by constantly wanting to push the bounds with things. It seems like it's always something. And if they're not trying to roll up a character that's outside of the bounds that I've already established, they're always wanting to roll up a new character and switch out and this and that and the other. So it's enough's enough. And you know, I'm gonna, as a DM, I'm just gonna say this next session, I'm just going to, you know, in general say, you know, here as a reminder, here's the boundaries, and, you know, that's pretty much what's it. If it's in the player's handbook or the SCAG, go for it. Otherwise, I'm just really not interested in this constantly reviewing stuff on a case-by-case basis. I'm already more flexible, much more flexible, because we're at the store. So the other thing is that I'm having to start to deal with is I've got a druid that can summon stuff, and now I've got a beastmaster and this and that. I got 8 players, and some of them have familiars, and some of them have. Now I'm going to have a velociraptor, and I've got the druid summoning stuff. That's a lot to keep up with. So I'm gonna ask them to try to have mercy on me with these characters that are always summoning all kinds of extra stuff or whatever, because it's a lot to keep up with. And I'm not going to tell them, look, you can't have a player that has a familiar, or you can't play a ranger that has an animal companion or something. I'm just saying, think about the group as a whole and the dynamic of a whole and how combat's going, and have mercy on your DM too. I don't want to keep up with 50 different things on top of your normal players when we already have 8 players. So that's one of those things where I just give you insight into my thinking as a DM. And I don't want to completely restrict them, don't get me wrong. But I just say, hey guys, kind of take me into account here too, because I want to have fun too. you know, but at the same time, it's kind of a fine balance to walk. I don't want to say, well, you can't do that and you can't do that and you can't do that. But it's starting to get and we only have like 2.5 hours on any given session because we play at night at a game store. Okay, so anyway, that's my thing on that player. I've been flexible, and I'm about to kind of push things back a little bit. I feel like that I've been very flexible for a couple of years with this player. So, okay, another thing, if you'll remember in the past few sessions, when that player I'm talking about swapped out characters, when the relief group came in from the Vanguard of the Eye, their adventuring guild, and they had lost 3 players fighting the vampire, and there was another player that wanted to, like, I can't go back in there. So that, or another character is like, I can't go back in there. I'm done. And so we had 4 new characters come in. Well, the party decided, which still, I'm just like, what? They sent that character back by herself hundreds of leagues to the guild headquarters in Phandalin with Black Razor wrapped in a bedsheet on her own. And so while I was talking to this player about the Unearthed Arcana Ranger and this and that and the other, the character that left was a tiefling sorcerer named Scorch. And I just said, Scorch was ambushed not far into her trip by cloaked figures that knew exactly what she was carrying. And they were basically like, surrender, or die, give it to us or die. Scorch fought back, and Scorch was, defeated. They had surrounded and were expecting, just on the road, surrounded by cloaked figures, kind of at night, and just, boom, took her out. Now, the player doesn't know, and I'm not going to say here if Scorch is alive or dead. And I told this player, I said, do not tell the other players. I said, I'm only telling you this because it was your character. I said, you don't know if Scorch is alive or dead, but Black Razor has been intercepted. Now, again, I'm thinking about making this the Zentarum, who has had spies in this village forever, waiting to see if anybody recovers these weapons. The village that's just outside of White Plume Mountain. But I'm really kind of starting to think about making this the Red Wizards of Thay. A couple of good suggestions there on that. The tattoo has been monitoring and scrying. I like that. I like that a lot. So, anyway, it's going to be some shady organization. So they're probably going to have to deal with, on the way out of the dungeon, they're going to have to deal with the dungeon's owner, who may or may not be Caraptus. And then they're going to have, when they think, well, that's the big climax. Nope, you got the real climax when this organization is going to confront you and want to take the weapons. So I'm pretty sure, and that's not in the adventure, that's just how I'm doing it. So, okay. The actual blow by blow of the last session. So they get to area 9, which is the kind of drain off to the side. There's like the corridors going up north. They're going up the middle section of the dungeon now, and there's this little side thing. It's kind of a side chamber, and it's just filled with water. And I think it goes like 10 feet down, and at the bottom there's this wheel, almost like a submarine door kind of wheel that you can, and if you open it up, I'm pretty sure it's a DC 20 strength check. Let me verify that here. Then, it's a DC 20 strength check. A channel will open, and all the water in the wet corridors will drain out in an hour. So they start investigating this, and also by the book, there's a secret. It says also at the bottom of the pit is a secret door that is concealed by illusion magic. The door cannot be detected by sight, but can be discovered through the use of magic or by someone who examines the area by touch and succeeds on a DC 15 investigation check, intelligence investigation. The doorway leads to Caraptus's indoctrination center. See escaping the dungeon at the end of the adventure. It's never fleshed out. It's up to the DM to flesh out what that is, the indoctrination center. And the indoctrination center comes back in at the end because there's a couple of Afrits, I think, that attack at the end, and you could either surrender to them and go to the indoctrination center or fight them. And the indoctrination center is never fleshed out in the adventure, so it's just a total side thing. And in my opinion, the way I'm trying to run the adventure, a distraction, because I'm not making Caraptus or whoever's running the dungeon to be the climax of the adventure. So it's just not. I made it the secret door is just not there. Now you could do different, or you could say the secret door has treasure in it. I mean, you could do whatever you want, but I just said it's just not there. I just don't want the distraction of it. That's kind of how I ran with it. Now, so they just took turns tying a rope to themselves and swimming down and trying to turn it. And they were tying the rope to themselves because they didn't know what was going to happen. They were, even though I as a DM, you're just going to turn it and it's going to start letting the water out. They didn't know, is it going to let more water in? Is it going to suck me off somewhere? They didn't know what was happening. So they did it took 3 or 4 people went down before they got a DC 20. I think the dwarf finally went down, the dwarf fighter, and was like, and opened it up. And by the book, it says a channel opens, and water, it says, what does it say? Yeah, a channel will open and all the water in the wet corridors will drain out in an hour. It doesn't really say much about what this channel is or where it is or what. I just said that they started hearing the sound of kind of like rushing water or moving water. But they're not sure of exactly what's happening. And I just did that for a little more suspense. I think they were suspecting the water was going to drain out, but they didn't know for sure. And they did ask to notice, like, do we see anything? And I gave them a perception check. I can't remember what it was. I think a 15. And they failed, so they didn't notice that it was going down. Now, within an hour, it's all going to drain out. And by the end of this session, they noticed that it was going down. But at that moment, they did not actually know what was going to happen. So that's basically that drain. It's a 10-foot, splash into the water, go down, turn the whatever. And by the old rules, if you go down in there and you're in armor or whatever, heavy armor, it could be dangerous. But by 5th edition rules, it's not really dangerous. It's just get down to the bottom and twist it. So they kept going north up the passageway, which leads us to room 10. Now, before we can really talk about room 10, well, I guess we could talk about room 10 before this, but we might as well get out of the way. Let's talk about Kelpies. Because Kelpies are a creature that were basically written for this adventure. And it's one of the creature types that it's not in the monster manual. It's listed in the back in Appendix B of the Tales of the Yawning Portal book. So monsters that are in these adventures, or creatures or NPCs or whatever, but not in the monster manual, are listed here. And Kelpy is one of them. So let's talk about a Kelpy real quick. A Kelpy is a medium plant, neutral evil, CR4, challenge rating 4. And I'm not going to go over every little thing, but they basically, they have a regular speed of 10. They have a swim of 30, AC 14, hit point 67. They're resistant to bludgeoning, fire, and piercing, and they're immune to blinded, deafened, and exhaustion. So they have blind sight 60 feet. They speak Common and Sylvan. So they're amphibious. They can breathe air and water. Now, in their normal form, they just look like a glob of seaweed. In fact, the false appearance, while the Kelpy remains motionless in its true form, it is indistinguishable from normal seaweed. So it's kind of like sentient seaweed. But it forms itself. The Kelpy can use its action to reshape its body into the form of a humanoid or beast that is small, medium, or large. The statistics are otherwise unchanged. Its appearance changes, but its actual statistics doesn't. The disguise is convincing unless the Kelpy is in bright light or the viewer is within 30 feet of it, in which case the seams between the seaweed strands are visible. The Kelpy returns to its true form if it takes a bonus action to do so, or if it dies. Now, in my case, I think the Kelpies were within 30 feet, but I kind of ruled due to the nature of the dungeon, and it was dark, even though there's dark vision and all that. They weren't sure. They look like females rising up out of the water. Um, and I think the party, for the most part, was assuming they were sirens. They have a multi-attack. They can make 2 slam attacks. Um, and if the target is medium or small, it's after a slam attack. It can also be grappled on a DC 12. Now, the drowning hypnosis is really where the Kelpies become dangerous, and this is where it chooses a humanoid it can see within 150 feet of it. Um, if the target can see the Kelpy, the target must succeed on DC 11 Wisdom saving throw or be magically charmed, while the Kelpy maintains concentration up to 10 minutes, as if concentrating on a spell. Now, the charmed target, and it's a little confusing here. So, if the way I'm reading this, if the target is within 5 feet of the Kelpy, it's incapacitated. And instead of holding its breath underwater, it tries to breathe normally and immediately runs out of breath unless it can breathe water, in which case you would need to go to the drowning rules, in which we've covered in this series before. If the charmed target is more than 5 feet away from the Kelpy, the target must move on its turn toward the Kelpy by the most direct route, trying to get within 5 feet. If it doesn't avoid opportunity, so see, if it's trying to get within 5 feet, if it's not within 5 feet, which indicates to me if it's in 5 feet, that's when it gets incapacitated and it just falls under the water and starts trying to breathe underwater. So if you can already breathe underwater, you're fine, whether you naturally can do that or if you have water breathing on you. But if not, you just immediately start drowning. And then it just says before moving into damaging terrain, which I don't think applies to this specific encounter, says such as lava or a pit, and whenever it takes damage from a source other than the Kelpy or drowning, the target can repeat the saving throw. A charmed target can also repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns. If the saving throw is successful, the effect ends on it. A target that successfully saves is immune to this Kelpy's hypnosis, to that Kelpy's hypnosis, not any Kelpy's hypnosis, that Kelpy's hypnosis for the next 24 hours. So, one thing you can do is if somebody's like obviously all charmed and going out to the Kelpy, you could ding them one. Then they get a saving throw because you've hurt them, because it says it takes damage from a source other than the Kelpy or drowning. So you could zap it or blang it or whatever, the dude or the doodad or whoever it is, and they get a chance for a saving throw. So they're kind of sirens, but they're really intelligent, nasty, neutral, evil seaweed, medium plant. So that's a Kelpy. And it could take any form at once, but, thematically and as originally written back in the day, they kind of become beautiful women, the form of beautiful women, of course, right? So, and as one of my players said, and really cracked me up, I loved this, they said that the Kelpies probably have censorship hair, and that's, of course, where the woman is, voluptuously naked, except for, the hair covering the naughty bits right there, right? So I loved that censorship hair. I've got to keep that and use that again. So when they came to the room, and what this is, it's just a big room that is, for the majority, it's 15-foot deep water, but there's a ledge that runs around a good portion of it that goes out 10 feet. And in one side, where their layer is, there's a ledge, and underneath the ledge there's a couple little chambers, and there's some treasure in one of the chambers and stuff like that. But they were kind of looking at the water, and they were like, because everywhere in the or a good part of the dungeon, everything's covered in a foot of water anyway. This nasty, foul, yucky water, lukewarm, algae on top, just gross. But they looked out and they were like, well, is it 1 foot all the way across? So I gave them a perception check, and somebody rolled in a natural 20. So I said, it looks like the water is deeper further out in the room. Okay. And at that point, the Kelpies started, once a couple of characters stepped into the room, and there's an initial ledge there they can step out on that goes out 10 feet, and immediately to the side, now further out, they'll drop into 15 foot of water, which actually happened to one of my characters. They stepped off the side and splish down they went. But there's supposed to be 2 Kelpies in this room. I added a 3rd Kelpy just to make things more interesting. Now I've got 8 players, or 8 characters at level 6, so they're pretty OP. at this point. So I could have gone through, well, let's see, the Kelpy CR4, so how do I want it? I could have gone through, but I just added a third Kelpy in there, and it turned into an interesting but not deadly encounter, which is what I wanted it to be. Now, I did have one character that fell under the hypnosis and was swimming out there as quick as he could. And he asked me, he said, do I have to dash? I guess that's kind of subjective. I said no. But really, in reality, I think if you're trying to get out by the most direct route and you'd probably dash. But I said you don't have to dash. But anyway, they got right to the Kelpy, and when they would have gone incapacitated and splished under the water and started drowning, then they made their saving throw, I think, at the end of that round, so they were fine as far as that hypnosis going on. Now, the group, out of character, just kind of speculating, thought they were dealing with sirens. They did nature checks. They weren't quite sure what they were dealing with. And then eventually, I think when I was talking, I said Kelpy, and they're like, "Oh, it's a Kelpy." I said it's Kelpy, and then so cat was out of the bag. They would have figured out eventually when they were dying. They would turn into seaweed or whatever. But they've got reach on that slam attack. So, that's pretty nasty. You get within 10 feet, they can just slam and grapple, and that slam attack does piercing and all this, and can grapple, and they got the hypnosis. This, in the right circumstance, this can be a deadly creature encounter. But again, I was hoping it wouldn't go that way, and it didn't. It was just a nice little fight with a different kind of creature they weren't used to. And I love the censorship hair. That's the best. That should be a creature ability. It should say censorship hair. And, we were making jokes about keeping abreast of the situation and the swell of things. Are things going swell? And, just throw a curveball at you. And that's about as naughty as our table gets. And even then we keep it PG. But we were making some puns. And, one of the characters was asking if his player asked if his character was blushing and that sort of thing. So another thing that happened is Thorin, who has Whelm, and up to this point Whelm is still waking up, as we've talked about in previous videos, and up to now Whelm has been a +3/+3 magical warhammer. Well, Whelm revealed its throne property. It said, "Throw me, lad," and because the Kelpy was out there, and Whelm is like, I think a 20-60, I don't know, it's 20 is within normal range, and I think out to 60 or something like that is long range. But Whelm can be thrown and ding its opponent, and I think it does like an extra 1d8 damage. If it's a giant, it does an extra 2d8 damage, plus it'll come right back. And if you get 2 attacks around, or 3 or whatever, you use like a bung, bung, bung. So Whelm, was like, "Throw me, lad," and, revealed that power, so that was kind of a cool moment. And of course, remember, Kelpies are resistant to bludgeoning. Just remember that. They're resistant and immune to certain things. Now, a couple of things that came up. It was a wizard that... You're a wizard, Harry. It was a wizard that swam out to the Kelpy, and I don't know if you heard that or not, but either my cats or my... Whoa, I'll be right back. Either my cats or my son did something. So it was a wizard who had been hypnotized, the drowning hypnosis, and went out, made haste out to the Kelpy, and right when it got within range, basically, then it made its saving throw. So it's in the water, swimming right next to one of the Kelpies. And at this point, I'm telling you, druids are pretty powerful. I'm reviewing the druid a little bit, because a 6th level druid, in the same round, summoned a giant snake, and also turned into a giant snake on the same turn. So, ba-boom! And I'm not saying that that's cheating or anything like that, but I need to review the druid to make sure I can be able to, design interesting encounters for the party if that kind of thing is going to be or alter encounters or whatever, or be prepared with tactics. Like I said, I'm not out to kill my players, but I want to give them a challenge. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier in the video. It's like, I got a familiar here, I got a giant snake here, I got a velociraptor. It's all this extra stuff I got to keep up with. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm prepared. for that sort of thing. But anyway, so the wizards in the water at the same time, this giant snake, two giant snakes are suddenly in the water. The wizards in the water next to the Kelpy, and I ruled that burning hands, because we were getting into somatic versus verbal versus components while you're in the water, like dog paddling or swimming or whatever. And I ruled that you couldn't burning hands, right? Because you've got to, you're like, and it just probably wouldn't work. And a different DM might rule otherwise, and that's fine. But on the spot, I said, well, I don't think you can do burning hands while you're basically in the water. But I did rule that, you can reach over and do shocking grasp because you're literally grabbing somebody. Now I don't know about the, doing all the somatic and verbal, but I just said you could do that if you want. And I also ruled, and somebody else might rule differently, that shocking grasp while you're grabbing somebody in the water did not electrify the whole water. Somebody else either may say, well, you can't do shocking grasp, or it electrifies the water or whatever. But in this case, that's how I ruled on those, if you're interested. So after the fight was over, it went a few rounds. It was an interesting fight, but not a incredibly difficult fight. I think they had fun with it. I had fun with it. The summoned snake kind of ferried people across to the other side of the chamber, and then the druid, who was still in snake form, who had swimming movement, kind of swam around and checked out the whole room and found the two chambers that finds the treasure of the Kelpies. On the east side, there's a couple of chambers underneath the ledge. And I think the southern one has the Kelpie's lair has 600 gold pieces, a piece of jewelry worth 2,000 gold pieces. This dungeon will reward you, and a suit of +1 chainmail armor. So, so that's how that works. The other thing of note to point out, on the western side of the Kelpie area with that ledge that's going around, kind of in the middle, suddenly there's a gap where you would, if you're not paying attention, you could step off and plunge 15 feet down into the water. And again, I'm like, why is that there? And my players and I were talking about it, and I think it comes back to that in the northwest way of White Plume Mountain. There's that 15 or that 10-foot pit under the water you can just step into. And again, the way the rules used to be in earlier editions, if you're wearing heavy armor and you fell into the water, it can become dangerous very quickly. So I think that's why that element is in this room on the map. That's just guessing, and that's what my players assume. The only thing to note at this point, they did notice after the fight with the Kelpies and everything, and searching and getting across, that the water was going down. So they're continuing to search the northern section. They're just now finishing with the Kelpie room. They haven't gone up the stairs that lead out of the water. Like every portion of the dungeon, every section has an area where you go upstairs and you get out of that 1 foot of water, although it's not going to matter here pretty soon, at least this visit to the dungeon, because they're draining it. They're about to go up, and they can either go straight to the crab and whelm and the force field bubble under the boiling lake, or they could go off east and deal with this crazy spinning cylinder and a crazy fight there. So we'll see what they choose to do. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. I appreciate it very much. And if you could, leave me a comment and a thumbs up. That really does help me a lot with engagements on YouTube, for visibility on YouTube. They assume the more engagements, the more relevant, the more they'll show me in search results and that sort of thing. So I appreciate you very much, and we will catch you next time on Shameplay.